that the COVID economy has been hard on so many businesses. Is this the time to try to increase taxes when they are not really out of the COVID slide of the economic impact of the pandemic?
Well, what we're talking about here, that's exactly why we shouldn't be increasing taxes on the American people, on people making less than $400,000 a year, why we shouldn't be putting in place user fees, because people are still trying to get through this period of time. Corporations who have had their tax rate lowered to 21%, lower by a great margin than it's been ever in history, corporations that didn't pay any taxes in 2018, we think they can afford to help rebuild our workforce, help invest in industries of the future, and make sure our infrastructure makes us competitive with China.
Go ahead, Peter.
Thank you, Jen. You just repeated what the president was talking about yesterday. You want corporations to bear the brunt of the $2.25 trillion over 8 years, but there are these calculations now that the corporate tax hike is not going to raise that much until 2036. So I'm curious where the rest of the money comes from.
Well, as was outlined in detail in our plan, we're talking about paying for an 8-year investment over the course of 15 years. And that, given that the investments are short-term investments, investments that are temporary, we actually would more than make up for the cost of these investments over time.
And one of the most colorful examples that the president used yesterday, he asked if people remembered a bridge going down, but only 5% of the spending in this package goes towards roads and bridges, and I'm curious why that number is so low and something that is being sold as an infrastructure package.
We're actually selling it as a once in a century or once in a generation investment in partly our infrastructure, but partly industries of the future, American workers and the workforce. And there are areas like broadband, which maybe is not a physical bridge, but 1/3 of the country doesn't have access to broadband. So that impacts workers who have been working from home, kids who are trying to learn at home, parts of the country where they can't have jobs, where they're working remotely. We feel that that is an area where we can improve, expand access, and as a result, be more competitive with the country, with other countries, I should say.
And then on immigration, has the White House considered beefing up border security now that there is video of a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old being thrown over the wall in New Mexico?
Beefing up border security.
There's video now of a 3-year-old and a 5-year-old.
I've seen the video, and I think any of us who saw the video were incredibly alarmed by the steps of smugglers, ones that we have been quite familiar with, that we've spoken out about our concerns about. As Secretary Mayorkas said, the inhumane way smugglers abuse children while profiting off parents' desperation is criminal and morally reprehensible. The president certainly agrees with that. And these kids, I believe, were rescued by individuals who are working at the border.
Yes, but they still got close enough, as you guys are talking about addressing root causes in the region, for a smuggler to throw them over a wall into the desert. And I'm just curious what the White House is doing to stop that from happening.
And are you concerned more about the kids' safety, or are you concerned about kids getting in, or tell me more about your concern here?
Kids' safety is, as you just mentioned, the main concern.
Well, of course it is, which is why I'm often surprised by some of the line of questioning here. But I will say that our concern and our focus is on sending a clear message to the region that this is not the time to come. You should not send your kids on this treacherous journey, that these smugglers are preying on vulnerabilities in these communities. There's a lot of issues and steps we need to take to address root causes. So of course our concern is for the safety of these kids. These Border Patrol agents who save these kids deserve our thanks and our gratitude for ensuring their safety. Go ahead.
Thank you. It's not just Leader McConnell, of course, and Republicans who are taking issue with some of this plan. We've seen some Democrats also voicing some concerns. So what is the president's message to these progressive members who say this plan doesn't go far enough?
Well, I think we would say this is a two-part proposal. One, it's an enormous investment in our infrastructure, in our roads, our railways, our bridges, our broadband, our waterways, and ensuring people have access to clean water. It accounts for, I think the number is about 1% of our GDP, so it certainly is a significant attempt to address that. It's also a two-part proposal, and the president will be speaking more in the coming weeks about how we can do more to help our caregivers, well, some of that was in this package, but help address the needs of childcare, help lower the cost of health care, and help do more to ensure we're easing the burden on families across the country.
Is the president confident that he can get Democrats united behind this plan?
I think the president believes that Democrats, that independents, that Republicans, as we've seen in polls across the country, believe that we should do more to invest in our infrastructure. And infrastructure means ensuring there's access to broadband. Infrastructure means ensuring that we rebuild our roads, our railways, and bridges. That's something that Democrats, Republicans, independents have talked about, the fact that it's long overdue for some time now.
And why are you splitting this into two parts? Is that a sign at all that you think the infrastructure portion, this first part, is something that you have a greater chance of getting passed?
I wouldn't overread into it in that way. We don't know what the legislative functioning or process will look like at this point. We're actually quite open to congressional committees moving forward on certain components. We're very open to members of Congress coming back with different ideas about how we can achieve the objectives outlined. It's an opportunity to lay out in a speech what our objective is, which is to compete with China, invest in infrastructure, and separately lay out in a couple of weeks what we need to do better as a country and as a government to help families address the needs of childcare, and that's why he's splitting it up.
And you've made clear, you've reiterated here, the president has also said, you're open to alternative suggestions for how to pay for this. But just to be clear, is the overall price tag here open for negotiation, or just how to pay for this?
The president proposed, based on the advice of economists and economic experts, how he feels we can achieve these objectives. We'll see what others come forward with in terms of different proposals or different ways to rebuild our infrastructure and ensure we're competing with China and better positioning ourselves in the world.
And just one last question on the impact of this. The president said yesterday that along with the stimulus bill, an estimated 18 million jobs could be created with this plan. We've seen a recent S&P forecast estimate that more than 2 million jobs would be created. What's the range that the White House thinks in terms of how many millions of jobs will actually be created by this plan?
We expect there'll be a number of outside economists and economic forecasters who will do projections in the coming days. We'll see what those look like. We expect them to be right in the ballpark of what the president said yesterday.
But why not put out your own suggestions here? I mean, you're asking for $2 trillion. Why not put out an estimate of how many jobs will be created?
We certainly expect there'll be a range of numbers that you all can refer to that are done by outside analysts, and that's a really effective way to give a sense to the American people of what can be expected from this package.
Go ahead. Thanks, Jen. Since Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell's already said that Republicans aren't going to play ball, she kind of took my question a little bit, but if Republicans came back with kind of a skinny infrastructure package, maybe brought back something that didn't include the $400 billion, I guess, for in-home help for disabled people, said maybe include it in the second package that you're working on, would the White House be open to that, to looking at a different package?
I'm just not going to negotiate from here, obviously. We're certainly open always to hearing ideas and proposals from Democrats and Republicans. We certainly put in the caregiving component of the package, the president did, because he believes that there is a huge impact on our workforce caregiving has a huge impact on our workforce, the cost, the time, the energy, the effort, and it is something that is keeping people from out of the workforce, keep preventing them from progressing in their jobs. So that's why he included in there. If Republicans disagree and don't think that that's an issue in our society, then they should come forward and certainly convey that.
Does President Biden support ending the Trump-era limit on state and local tax deductions, otherwise known as SALT? One Democrat saying no SALT, no deal on infrastructure. What's the president's stand on that?
If Democrats want to propose a way to eliminate SALT, which is not a revenue raiser, as you know, it would cost more money, and they want to propose a way to pay for it, and they want to put that forward, we're happy to hear their ideas.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Jen. I know this is a follow-up to the last question, but just specifically, are there red lines in the first phase of the infrastructure bill on things like on the money that's earmarked for racial inequality, racial equity, the pot of money for the $400 billion for seniors? Are those musts when it comes to the first phase of the bill?
The president's focus is on the objectives he's trying to achieve, which is rebuilding our infrastructure so we can compete around the world, putting millions of back to work, easing the burden, as you noted, of caregiving, which is impacting millions of Americans who are not in the workforce in the way they would like. So I'm not going to give you red lines from here, only to convey that he designed this bill, the administration designed this bill with an effort to meet the moment. And to do it in a way that ensures we are looking at addressing challenges in our country through a lens of equity, that we're doing it in a way that helps cities and rural America, that we're doing it in a way that meets the moment and meets the moment of the needs for a once-in-a-century investment. But we certainly understand that there will be a difference of views. There will be a discussion about how to achieve these objectives. So he looks forward to members making their own proposals.
Is he willing to narrow the first phase of the bill at all for, things that the Republicans deem to be truly critical infrastructure?
I haven't seen a proposal from them for specific areas to narrow and what the impact would be. And if they want to propose that, I'm sure he's happy to have a discussion, but we're not going to negotiate from here.
I want to pivot to another topic. Earlier this month, the administration delivered an intelligence report to Congress. It warned of the rising dangers by militia groups, extremists, white supremacists. Does the president feel that it's time for the U.S. to adopt a domestic terrorism statute?
Well, as you know, Zolan, he talked about that a bit on the campaign trail. What he has asked his administration to do is do a 100-day review on domestic violent extremism, because there is such an expansive impact and threat around the country of domestic violent extremism. We have a couple more weeks of that review that are underway, the policy-making component of that, and I expect once it's concluded, there'll be some recommendations on how to best address this threat.
And then I have a quick immigration question.
Sure.
The administration has often cited that they continue to expel single adults, families, or intend to expel families back south across the border. I mean, those migrants are going to some of the same areas that they were returned to under MPP as well. The administration unwound MPP and criticized it pretty sharply. And CDC officials have also reportedly opposed Title 42 when it was implemented by the Trump administration. So how does the continued use of that rule square with President Biden's campaign pledge to restore asylum at the border? And secondly, what is the CDC assessing when it comes to deciding when to lift that order?
Well, first, we're still in the middle of a public health crisis. There's 1,000 people a day approximately dying of COVID-19 still. And of course, the CDC and others, and I would defer to them on what their criteria are and their timeline, but they look at that and, of course, the impact. So I don't anticipate any near-term change, but I would defer to them on their timeline. Go ahead.
On the list of the most urgent infrastructure projects that you have identified as an administration, when will the White House put out a list of those projects as outlined in the plan, and which agency is in charge of this?
Well, there's a jobs cabinet and council, or jobs cabinet, I should call them, that will be playing a variety of roles, including in the internal policy development process, and engagement with Capitol Hill, engagement with governors, engagement with the American public. Once the bill passes, there'll be a competitive bidding process.
Okay. So to clarify, the five individuals that the president named today as being in charge of selling?
In terms of they will be in charge of, sorry to combine the things, they will be in charge of communicating with the public, communicating with Congress, communicating with mayors and governors, having discussions about different components of the bill, whether it's broadband or different infrastructure components, the impact on businesses. These are the cabinet members who will all play a role in this engagement. But the competitive bidding process obviously wouldn't start until the bill's passed.
Okay. On the president's budget or the discretionary guide, can you give us an update on why it's delayed? I think we expected it to be out today.
I don't have any update on the timeline. I know it will be out soon, but I don't have any more specifics for you.
And then one lastly, on the president's interview with ESPN last night, he was obviously very critical of the Texas Rangers reopening their stadium at full capacity in the middle of the pandemic. Apart from urging people to wear masks, wash their hands, socially distance, is the president planning to take any other measures to try to slow the pace of the reopening and engaging with governors, especially as we see a rise of cases in a number of states?
Well, his focus is on action, and so you've noted some of them, but it is when he saw an urgency in the rising cases, we took some urgent action, including more than doubling the number of pharmacies that will have the vaccine, increasing our commitment and our investment in mass vaccination sites and community health centers. His view is the more people we can get vaccinated more quickly, the better positioned we will be. So that's where his focus is.
Are you worried that the reopening and rise in cases will sort of pace the vaccination pace?
I would leave it to our health experts to make predictions of that kind. I would say that what we have control over here is how rapidly we can get the vaccine out, how many locations we can ensure the vaccine is available to the public in. We can continue to do more to meet people where they are. That's where our focus is. I'd also note that though some governors have rolled back public health guidelines, something obviously we wouldn't support given the public health guidelines are in place, a number of mayors, local elected officials, businesses have kept them in place even in a number of those states because it's not a political issue, and they have taken those steps in order to keep the people in their jurisdictions safe. Go ahead.
Thanks, Jen. So during the campaign, the president signaled his support for expanding paid family and medical leave.
Mm-hmm.
I know the provision was enacted during the pandemic, expired, and paid leave wasn't in the stimulus package. Is paid leave something that the president will commit to including in the second part of his infrastructure proposal?
Well, there's naturally still ongoing discussions about the final pieces of the package. He does believe that it is. He did include actually emergency